Hey everybody, Bandit here. Welcome to the Bandit Flight Simmer channel. Today on the channel we're going to take an initial look at the recently released DH6 Twin Otter, recently released by Aerosoft. And we're going to put it through its paces on a quick flight from Juneau to Ketchikan. We're here in Juneau, Alaska, and what a perfect place for this airplane to fly. This is the workhorse of the northern Canada, northern United States, Alaska, many other parts of the world too, and remote locations. It's a STOL aircraft, fully IFR capable, flight into known icing, so it's quite a workhorse, especially in the far north in Canada, where you have a lot of gravel strips and they're very far apart, so you need aircraft with a good payload, good range. And because of the long trips, unreliable weather, so you need to be able to go IFR when you need to. So this airplane is capable of all that, and we're going to have a look at it. So before we get going here, I'd just like to say, if you're new to the channel, make sure you hit the subscribe button, sign up for notifications, and you'll see other videos like this, including tutorial videos I do on the G1000. I'm doing a Around the World series in the Diamond DA62, and I'm planning on doing some tutorials on the 737 by PMDG when that comes out. So again, thanks for joining me, and let's go over the Twin Otter. So first we'll just take a look at the outside, and typical Aerosoft aircraft. The textures are really nice, detail is nice, the airplane looks really good, and inside looks really good as well. This is a Aklik Air livery. There's about 8 different aircraft, I think, in the package. Some on floats, some on amphib, retractable gear floats, and fixed gear like this, and with either normal or Tundra tires. This is a cargo variation of the Twin Otter on Tundra tires, and yeah, so that looks pretty good from the outside for sure. Let's take a look on the inside and see how things look in there. So here we are on the inside, and again the details look really good. Texturing looks nice. This is a cargo variation. So we have a cargo load in the back, and that's just a default load. You can't change that, unlike you can in the Kodiak. But that's fine, and they have passenger configurations as well. Anyway, the details look really nice. Texture looks pretty good. Your doors function here, and we have control locks on the controls. Just get rid of that there. You can remove the controls here to clear up your space. A couple switches here open the cargo compartments, and if we go outside back here, we can open up the cargo door, and now if we hop outside, we can take a look. So there's your doors open, your forward cargo, aft cargo open, and your cargo compartment door, or your main cargo door. So everything animated pretty nicely and looks pretty good. Okay, so let's hop back inside, get everything closed up, and talk about the flight we're going to do today. Okay, we're going to do a quick flight from Juneau to Ketchikan, and we're here on the ground in Juneau. The weather is not too bad, just some broken cloud, light winds, and we're going to do departure out of Juneau on the airway south from Sierra Romeo VOR down through Level Island, and then down to Dozy, where that's the initial fix for the ILS going into Ketchikan. So that's the route we're going to do. It's about an hour-and-a-half flight, and I'm going to cut out most of the cruise portion once we get up there, but we'll cover off most of the features as we get up to cruise, and then we'll transition down, and then we'll take it over from coming in the instrument approach at Dozy. I'll just go over the departure real quick. Just going to fly using the manual instrumentation. It's going to be taking off runway 8, right climbing turn, rough heading 297 to track to the Kogan Island NDB 212, and then outbound the Kogan 251. We're going to track the ILS localizer outbound to 8 DME, and then that'll take us to Barlow. We'll make a left turn and track the 207 inbound to SSR VOR Sisters Island. So we got to tune a lot of nav aids. It's going to be you know, a lot of work on the departure there. And I have done this flight. I just did a practice flight in this airplane, and I tell you, it was a lot of work. The autopilot really doesn't function that great, and I had to disconnect the autopilot probably about half a dozen times. It was blown through altitudes. Vertical speed wasn't maintaining proper vertical speed, and so I had a lot of autopilot issues with this. So I'm going to try it again and see how if we can do any better this time. I usually do at least one practice flight in these airplanes before I fly them. I'm not a Twin Otter pilot by any means. I've never really flown a Twin Otter, so I don't have any Twin Otter wisdom to impart on you, but I would say overall, if you're looking to get this airplane, if you're going to fly mostly VFR, which is probably more what this airplane is suited for, it's probably going to be a great airplane for you. If you're looking to fly on VATSIM IFR from A to B, it's definitely going to have its issues, so definitely going to be a lot of work. Anyway, let's see how things go. It might not be perfect today, but should be fun trying to make this work. Okay, let's go through the pre-start here, and what I'm doing is I'm just using the pre-start checklist that comes with the manual. It's about a 150-page manual, has a lot of detail on things, and there's some things in the checklists that are kind of awkward that we'll go over, and I'll talk about those as we get going. But yeah, so let's get the checklist going and get the airplane started up and programmed up and up on our way. And I'm going to load up the GPS. I'm going to put in the basic route. I'm not going to put in the departure or anything. We're going to fly the departure manually. Okay, so let's get this thing going. Okay, we'll go through the checklist. There's two checklists in the manual. There's a short checklist and a long checklist. The short checklist is kind of like for your second flight of the day, third flight of the day, and the long checklist is for your initial flight of the day, and includes a lot of items like run-up checks, prop feather checks, stuff like that. I'm not sure if they're modeled correctly, and I haven't taken the time to go through them to see if they are, and I've heard they might not be modeled correctly, so I'm going to stick with the short checklist, and that's just going to get us going as if the airplane's already flown today. And yeah, so let's get that going. So parking brake set, so you set it down here, so pull it, set it on. Emergency fuel switches, they're up here on the emergency panel. We got those are in normal. Fuel selector switch is down here, it's in normal. Fuel boost pumps are off, and they're both off. Aft boost pump, forward boost pump. Radio magnetic master switch. Now, this is something I couldn't find one in this airplane, and when I turn on the battery and the DC power master, it powers up the avionics, so I don't think there is one on this airplane. Now, there could be on other models. There's 8 other models that one of them could have a avionics master, but this airplane, I couldn't find it anywhere. So anyway, we'll move on. Cabin lights and signs. So here's another thing about this cabin. Unique to this airplane is most stuff overhead, including your throttles, prop levers, fuel control levers, your flaps, and all your overhead switches. And look how far back they are. It's very awkward to kind of just scroll up to this area and then try to find the right switch. So what I did is I mapped the overhead panel to some keyboard keys so that I could quickly move up there and then get a good view of all the switches up here. So we're looking at beacon light on, so I'm going to turn on my nav lights and my beacon light. And they are, oh, that's the landing lights, sorry, nav lights. There we go, beacon light. Pitot heat is off, generator switches are off, and fuel levers are off, and their back is to the off position. Flap levers are up. Power levers, propeller levers full forward, so I'll move those full forward. Power levers, it says 10% forward, so I'm just going to take a guess at 10% here. And yeah, that looks good. And then we are going to the battery master and the DC master. So there's a start panel up here, so I'll put the battery, put it on battery or external power, your choices, and then we'll put the DC master on. Powers up the airplane, come down, check our fuel. Fuel quantity is checked. We got 800 aside, so 1,600 pounds. Burns about 600 pounds an hour. This is an hour and a half flight, so should be about 900 pounds, so we should have lots of gas. Okay, so that's the pre-start checklist. So now we're going to get ready for the engine start and quickly start both these engines. This airplane's really loud, so I got the volume turned down. I'll turn it up a little bit later so you can hear the sounds really good, but I don't want it to overpower me, so I do have it turned down. Hopefully it's not down too low. Okay, so we'll turn both pumps on. You can do this one at a time, but I'm going to turn them both on. And then we are going to clear to the right, clear to the left, and I'll put the right engine on. We'll go down to the instruments. We'll look for 14 on the NG, and then once we get 14 on the NG, we'll go up to the introduce our fuel. Now we're going to watch our T's and P's. Temperatures and pressures are coming up. Look for NG to stabilize over 50. Prop start to come up. T5's coming up, and torque is just sitting at about 4 or 5 psi because we have the throttle up a little bit. So it looks like a good start. Go back to the start panel, and we make sure that our starter is cut off. And now we're going to start the other engine. So clear to the left, and we'll start the left engine. Again, go down, looking for 14%. There we go. Introduce our fuel. And looks like we got a light off. Temperatures and pressures are coming up. Look for that to stabilize as well. Go to our start panel, and the starter is out. So starter is in center position, and that's it. After start checks, says to bring it up to roughly 15% forward, so I'll bring it up a little bit more. Go to the overhead panel, and it says to put the generators on. So generators on. Engine instruments check within limits. They are within limits. And radio master says to turn it on, but all our avionics, as you can see, are all on already except for our transponder, so we'll just turn that to standby. But it's powered, so there's no avionics master or radio master I can see. And we will go back and check our gyros. So our main gyro is spun up and looks centered. We've got our standby heading, so our directional gyro shows 338, and then our standby, yeah, it's about pretty close to that as well, so that looks good. Altimeters checked. We'll set our Aero 2999, and lights are good. So now we're ready to taxi, and before we taxi though, let's set up our nav aids for our departure. So what I'll do is I'm going to load the basic route into the GPS and then set up our nav aids, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so let's do that. So head over to the GPS page, and I'm going to put in the nav aids first. So the first nav aid we need is the ILS frequency in VOR 1. So push that, select 1099, move that up. And our backup, we're going to put our first VOR that we're going to track, which is 114.0, which is the SSR VOR. So that's set there. I'm going to put that in here as well for VOR 2. We'll make that active. And then our NDB, we need to put in 212. So 2. There we go. Let's swap that over. So we have our frequencies set up for the departure. Next thing we need to do is load in our route. So I will select flight plan, and we'll start off with PAJN. So this will take me a few minutes. I'll just load this route in, and then I'll come back to you in a couple of minutes. Okay, we have our route enter in. There's Juneau, Sisters Island VOR, Level Island VOR, and Dozy. And actually I need to put in Ketchikan there. I don't know why that didn't go in there. There we go, Ketchikan. Okay, so that's our route entered in. So the last thing I need to do, and I'll just have this in as a backup here. So I'll just put that in. So there's SSR, and then we head south from there. Next thing we need to do is I'm going to put in our altitude. We're going to plan to do this at 9,000 feet. And I'm going to put in our initial track for the ILS we're going to track. And we're going to track 251, but 071 is the course because we need to put the inbound course in, even though we're tracking the ILS outbound. And then VOR 2, I'm going to put in 207, which is our initial course to track outbound the Sisters Island VOR. So basically the way your nav aids work is you have this HSI and you have a course selector, and that is for VOR 1. And in this case I have VOR 1 and I have VORLOC active over here. So I have VOR 1 course 071 set in, and that's going to be tracking our ILS outbound. I have our NDB, and this is a fixed card ADF, so the compass doesn't rotate. We have to manually set our heading here. So there's the ADF needle. And then the VOR2 is just this course direction indicator, and this just shows your deviation left or right of course, and you set your course up here, and I have 207 set for my course to go to Three Sisters VOR once we get close to there. So there's our nav aid set up. So I think we have everything ready to go. Our initial heading for the right turn is going to be 279, so I'll set that up as well. And so let's look at our taxi check. So taxis, we're just going to check our brakes and our gyros that are operating properly. And yeah, and then we're going to arm our auto feather. So I'll do that now. I'll select auto feather arm, or select it, and it should go to arm. I notice this doesn't, when you go to the high power takeoff setting, it should automatically switch to arm mode, but it doesn't seem to do that. But anyway, it's selected. I'm not sure if that's right or not. I don't know the Twin Otter auto throttle, auto feather system very well, but I've seen other systems where it should, once you select it, it should indicate arm here. But anyway, it's not doing that. And our autopilot is set to go. Altitude is set, so I think we're ready to taxi. I'm going to put our flaps at 10 for takeoff. We'll get our taxi light on, and looks all clear. We're going to taxi over Buddy there as we head out. Those guys are always in the way. So we'll release our parking brake, and that little bit of power we have set will get us going. Sorry guys, you might get hit by the prop there. Here we are in Juneau. Just some broken cloud and maybe snow showers around the area there, but should be a good flight down to Ketchikan. So what I'll do is I'll turn the sounds up just so that you can hear them a little bit better. And see what they're like. This is a really loud airplane, so I kind of find it very loud, and I didn't want to have to keep talking over that. So brakes are checked. I've checked my gyros, turning left, to the left, ball right, and good. The gyros are good. Brakes are good. Taxiing up here. Plane taxis fairly nicely. Once you get going, you just a little bit of power to get going, and then you can just kind of leave it at idle. And if you get going pretty fast, you can just pop it into reverse for a minute and slow down. It has nose wheel steering, kind of just linked to the rudder for me right now. And if we go down to the controls here, in real life, I guess there is a nose wheel steering knob that you go left and right for nose wheel steering. But even with the rudder, it's not. Oh yeah, it does move with the rudder. There we go. See? That's how you would use the nose wheel steering. If I had right now I just have one axis for the rudder, so let's link together. So the volume is pretty high. I'm going to turn it back down just so it doesn't remain overpowering. Hopefully you can still hear it. Hopefully it's not too loud. Now, as I said before, I had some real issues with the autopilot on this airplane, so I might have to do a little bit of hand flying, but we'll see how it goes. And I've read on the Aerosoft forum there has been lots of issues. It uses the stock CAP 140 autopilot with Microsoft Flight Simulator, and yeah, it's not working great. I've had it blow through altitudes and problems with the vertical speed and getting well below the glide slope. So not great at the best of times. Okay, parking brake is set. So let's do the before takeoff checklist. So fuel quantity is checked. Good. Pumps are on. Forward and aft. Trim tabs are set, so we got our trim down here is set, and then we set for takeoff on our rudder. Flight instruments, they're all set up. Navcom radios are set. Propeller levers are full forward. Flaps are set at 10 for this takeoff. Engine instruments are checked. Pitot heat, we'll go to the upper panel and we'll turn that on. Anti-ice is as required, so we don't need any anti-ice on right now. Flight controls are free. So we'll say we check the flight controls are free. Transponder set and on. So I'm going to squawk, just squawk 1, 2, 3, 4. And we'll put it on. Landing lights are going on. Taxi lights coming off. And we're going to check our runway heading when we get lined up. Now, one thing it doesn't mention in the checklist is, go back to the overhead panel here, it doesn't mention the bleed air. Now, bleed air is required to use the de-icer boots, and it's required to heat the cabin. So I don't know why it doesn't mention it, but I'm going to turn it on. Might be a little bit of drop in power there, or a rise in ITT, or the T5 temperature. I'll put it in auto mode. And so now we have the bleeds on in case we need to use the de-ice. And you notice on the caution panel, there's one light still on. It's pneumatic pressure low. And that's because the pressure is not high enough at the current low power setting to operate the systems. I'm thinking the de-ice system. But anyway, that will stay on. But once we add some power, that will go away. And anytime we go to low power settings, it's going to come back on again. So that's just so you're aware what that is. So I think the pre-takeoff checks are good to go. Now for when we get out of the runway, here's the engine instruments. I'm just going to talk about that before we get going. So the torque is measured in PSI, so that's maximum torque is 50 PSI. You got your T5 temperature, which is your turbine temperature. That shows here. You got your prop RPM shows here, and you got your NG or your gas turbine temperature, or RPM, gas turbine RPM. And then over you got your oil pressure and temperature on either side, and you got your fuel flow as well. So when I get on the runway, I'm going to set the parking brake, and I'll just set the parking brake. Normally I just hold the brakes on, but I'll just set the parking brake so I can come down here and show you how we set this. I'll set about 30 PSI. Watch, make sure my propeller RPM comes up. Watch my T's and P's are all on the green, and then once everything looks good, we'll release the brakes and we'll slowly advance the power, making sure we stay below 50. At sea level, on a cold day like today, you can easily over-torque these engines. And I noticed on a couple of videos of guys flying this plane, they seem to go full power, and it bumps up to like 60 plus torque, and so you shouldn't be doing that with your engine. You should be monitoring your torque and setting your max PSI here, or staying below your max PSI of 50. So that's what we're going to do. So we'll release the parking brake, head out to the runway, clear to the right, clear to the left, a little bit of power just to get going. Props are full, landing light is on. Okay, lined up on the runway. I'll just set the parking brake. We'll go down to the instruments. So I'll set 30 psi. And prop RPM's coming up. Temperatures and pressures are all looking in the green. Our pneumatic low pressure light has gone out. Everything looks good. So we're ready to go brake release. And now I'll just slowly continue inching up the torque there. Airspeed is alive. We're going to rotate at 74 knots. Climb out at 80, accelerating to 100. There we go. Rotate. Okay, we leave the gear where they are since they're fixed. Get the climb coming up. And I'll get the flaps up. And we'll trim for about a 100 knot climb. Speed's coming up. Okay, we'll start our right turn. Take a look outside. Beautiful scenery here in Juneau. So climbing at 100 knots, I'll make a right turn direct to the NDB. And the NDB is on our very left nav instrument there. So speed is good. Just going to roll out as we track to the NDB. And looking good. I'll try to get some trim going here. And I'm going to engage the Autopilot yaw damper. And the airplane's accelerating. I'm going to go vertical speed. And I'll heading select. And we'll come a little bit left to track towards that NDB. And I'm going to climb. I'm going to set about 1,800 foot per minute in the climb here. Okay, next thing we need to do is for the climb, we need to set our propeller RPM to 91. And that's the top of the green arc. I don't know why they only have that on one side here. So there's our climb RPM. And I'll leave it about, I'll leave the torque where it is right now. And we're climbing pretty good here. So speed is good. A little bit fast, but I'm climbing at a good rate here. And we're not quite tracking towards that NDB yet, so let's come and right a little bit. So we get our climb checks. Flaps are up. Auto feather can go off. Climb power is set. Landing lights can go off. And we're climbing along pretty good here. Just above 100 knots. And we're just coming up to the NDB. Once we hit the NDB, we're going to track outbound of 251. So I'll put that in initial heading. We haven't picked up the ILS yet, but we're going to track outbound from the, there we go, now we're just picking it up now. So I'll just bring my heading around to keep that ILS in line. So now we're tracking, now the ILS is very sensitive, so we'll pick it back up here. And so we track out the ILS to 8 DME. Now we're only at 3.4. And that's one of the things with this airplane, it doesn't have any DME in your cross-check here. Normally a lot of airplanes will have a DME readout somewhere near your 6-pack, but we got to go all the way over to the GPS to see what the DME is, so it's not a very good part of your, takes you outside of your normal instrument cross-check. So here comes the ILS frequency. ILS is back in track here, looking okay. 7,000 feet for 9,000. Now, I'm going to reduce the rate of descent, or rate of climb here, down to about 500 feet per minute. And hopefully we won't blow through the altitude. I've had it blow through the altitude quite a few times here. Let the speed build up a little bit. Keep the power up. I'm going to bring back a little bit of power. Looking good. Let's see where these winds are. The winds are, oh yeah, quite a strong wind from the left there, that's why. So I'm going to have to keep on a little bit of heading to keep that ILS track good. So you can see we're heading out towards SSR here. There we go. So coming back there. Got about a 27 knot wind coming from the left. So if we look on our departure here, it's looking good so far. So we're tracking outbound to Barlow, and then when we hit 8 DME, we're going to make a left turn. And there's 1,000. Oh, there's 1,000 feet to go. And you can see on VOR 2, our next course is coming in, which is our course inbound of 207 to SSR. So that's starting to come in. We're 7 miles, so we're going to have to make that turn pretty soon. So what I'm going to do is, just prior to reaching the course here, so I'm going to now heading select it to 207. And I'll switch nav aids up here. And I'll dial in 207 on our course 1. And there we go, we're now tracking outbound 207 to Sister Island. So that looks good. And now that I'm tracking that, I can actually hit nav, and I can do that up here, select nav, and then it's just going to put on the correction to maintain our course there, because we are still getting, oh no, we're right into wind now. So let's see how we do on the level off here. Maybe that's the key to while I was blowing through my level offs. I was keeping a 2,000 foot per minute climb going here. So now we've got 14 miles to track inbound to the VOR till we make our next turn. So just coming up to level off. So for level off, I'm going to set the cruise power, and that is going to bring our propeller back to 75 RPM. And then I'll maintain 40 on our torque. And then that should give us about 140 knots. Hey, look, we're leveling off. Working out. Okay. So our next track outbound, so we're coming up to, so we're tracking now inbound to SSR, and our track outbound to our airway is going to be 125. So what I'm going to do is I'll dial in this course selector 125. And then now we'll watch this. As this comes in, we'll make the turn onto that track and heading select. Now there is a problem with this aircraft here. It will not track outbound on a VOR. So right now we're inbound on a VOR and I have it in nav mode, but it wouldn't track outbound from the VOR. And you'll see this. So what I'm going to use is primarily heading select in this instrument here for VOR2, because we have VOR2 tuned as well to SSR. And I'm going to select it over to heading select, make the turn outbound. I'll use this as my primary nav aid, and then I'll switch over the track to track outbound for the 125, and you'll see what I mean by one track outbound, beacon outbound. So we'll use heading select and we'll use the VOR2. And let's see, how far back are we? It's kind of a pain having to come over here to check your DME all the time. 10 DME back. Okay, so I'll check in with you in a couple of minutes. Things are looking good. I'll just go through our cruise checklist. So cruise power is set. That's all we have for the cruise checklist. So cruise power is set. Prop RPM, cruise power, fuel flow is good. We're below 600 pounds an hour, and speed is good. Okay, I'll check in with you just as we come up to SSR again, and we'll make the turn, and we'll look at this little idiosyncrasy with the VOR. Okay, we're coming up to Sister Island VOR. We're just a couple miles back. We should see the track starting to come in here. And we're going to make a left turn. So I'm going to center up my heading bug. I'm going to go to heading select now and get ready to make the left turn. And as this track starts to come in, I'll make the left turn to get on our course of 125 outbound from Sister Island. Oh, we're just losing it now, so I'm going to go to 125. And we're already going over the VOR. We're a little bit right of track, so I'll put on an intercept heading. I'll add about 105, put about 20 degrees on to get back on the course. So the course should come in pretty quick as we cross over the VOR. Now on this VOR, you're going to notice I'm going to put in the course of 125 as well. And you see our course is coming back in here, so I'm going to come back to the right. You see the course is coming in here, but this is not picking up that course at all. It either goes full deflection left or full deflection right. And see what the winds are doing over here. Yeah, we've got, where'd my winds go? Oh, winds, crosswind from the right, that's why. Yeah, some wicked winds up here. So I'm going to just heading select it a bit more to the right there. What's going on with the altitude here? Ooh. A little bit of icing. This is one of those wind shifts, I think, from Microsoft Flight Simulator, come in occasionally because the winds change from 30 knot crosswind to 20 knot tailwind, so that was probably our altitude issue there. So you see our track is coming back in here for 125, but this is staying full deflection on the VOR1, and you can see we have 14.4. 14.4 is the same frequencies. The tracks are the same, 125, and this one's coming in, and I'm going to just apply probably a heading 130 to maintain that track. And this is not, see, it either goes full deflection, it's kind of wacky, but it just will not, see, it just either goes full deflection one way or the other. It doesn't recenter the track here. But if I do the OBS here, you see how it just kind of, so I'll go back to 125. And you see how each degree kind of changes there. Well, it doesn't do that on here. But ironically, if I hit nav, and you can only track on nav on the VOR, it will track this accurately as long as I have 125 set. Even though this course needle is not even centered, you'll see it center up over here. It's going to apply the wind correction, get on track, and it will fly this perfectly, even though this CDI is totally out to lunch. So that's it's kind of hard to believe they didn't pick that up in pre-release here when they were test flying this. But anyway, I noticed it right away on the very first flight I did. I loaded up a VOR and was tracking it, and yeah, it was, anyway. So we're in altitude mode and nav mode, and we're tracking outbound. Everything looks good. Look, we get another jump there. Got the winds change again, so that's what that is. So it's correcting back down. Yeah, it must be something up with the winds and the real live weather here, because it made a jump from a tailwind of 20 knots to a crosswind of 36 knots. Okay, so yeah, that's if you're going to fly IFR, make sure you're aware of that, because you're going to, and that's only tracking outbound. Tracking inbound works fine, and tracking the localizer inbound works fine as well. So just something to be aware of when you're flying this airplane. It's mentioned in the comments in the Aerosoft forum, so hopefully they're going to fix it in an update soon. Okay, so now we're level off in cruise here. Everything's looking good. Let's switch over to the GPS. So we have our GPS track in here. That's to Level Island and then off to Dozer after that. So right now we're tracking on Vorloc. So I'm going to disengage nav, and I'm going to switch over to GPS, and then I'm going to re-engage nav again. And now my course comes in for my nav course, because now this is representing what the track is on the GPS track. So that centers, and nav is captured, and now we're tracking nav using the GPS instead of Vorloc. So that might be your option, is just until they get this fixed, just use GPS tracking inbound to stations instead of Vorloc. But like I said, the Autopilot works. You can put your frequency in your secondary nav source and have the information there. So there's ways around it. But anyway, let's hop outside and have a look. Looks pretty good. Nice looking plane. This is perfect plane for flying this part of the world, that's for sure. Fully IFR capable, de-icing, short runway, STOL capability, reliability, 2 engines, good cargo hauler, lots of room. Perfect plane for this environment. Okay, so now we can take a few minutes to go over some of the other stuff on the aircraft here. So while we're in cruise here, let's talk about the Autopilot. And just initially when I was engaging the Autopilot, I was using my Class Echo device, which has Autopilot controls on it, because it's much easier than trying to fiddle around with these controls on here. So I'll just go through them though. So we have 2 Autopilot panels here. We have just this panel up here, which allows you to select different modes and engage your Autopilot. And then you have your CAP 140 Autopilot control panel down here, where you can engage the Autopilot down here as well and select your different modes, heading, nav, approach mode as well down here. So those are the 2 different ways of engaging the Autopilot. Now in the manual it talks about indicated airspeed, but we can't use indicated airspeed on this Autopilot. If you press it, nothing happens, doesn't engage, doesn't do anything. The only climb mode, or the only pitch mode, is vertical speed. Otherwise you have heading mode for lateral track. You have approach mode, which captures your glide slope, but the only pitch mode other than approach mode is vertical speed. And you don't engage vertical speed on here at all. So let's say we want to climb to 11,000 feet. So I'm not really totally used to this Autopilot system here, but let's try to figure it out. So if we dial up 11,000 feet, so there's 11,000 feet in our altitude selector, and I'm going to hit altitude, and I'm going to engage vertical speed, and I'm going to put 1,000 foot per minute climb. So I got vertical speed, approach mode, nav, and it climbs up to vertical speed. I'm going to add some power for the climb here to keep my speed up. And I'll leave the power propeller RPM back, but there we go. So we'll climb up to 11,000 feet. So that's how you would do this autopilot system here. And then as we get a little closer, I think maybe the issue I might have been having was I was climbing, you know, well, this 11,000 feet per minute is not that bad, but I was climbing at like 1,500, 2,000 feet per minute, and that was probably why I was shooting through the altitudes there. But we'll watch it here closely, see what happens. The other autopilot functions are on here. You have your yaw damper, so you can turn your yaw damper on and off, and I have a switch for that on my panel as well. Okay, we're 1,000 feet to go. And then, I'm not sure how this works, but I think when you engage the autopilot and you don't have any pitch mode or lateral mode, like roll mode set, you can actually control pitch and roll with these and just set pitch and roll attitudes. Maybe it's something to try on another flight. I'm not going to try it right now, but so if I disengage the roll mode and the heading mode, so if I disengage nav and I disengage the vertical speed, I should be able to control the pitch and the roll with this. We'll try it out a little later on. Let's just capture our altitude here and see how it goes. Anyway, that's on the center console. I'm not sure if that's modeled, so get rid of that for now. And let's see how our level off goes here. It's coming up pretty good, slowing down, seems to be capturing. We've got alt captured now. And we level off or let our speed build up, and I'm going to reset 40 psi on the torque. Okay. Well, I must say the autopilot's working a lot better than my first flight. Which is good. So that is the autopilot system. So you have your control up here, you have your control panel down here. If you select nav up here, you can select it down here, either or. You can engage your autopilot either one. I find when you engage the autopilot, it kind of wants to level off or pitch down initially. So make sure you're trimmed up and make sure you're ready to go to vertical speed mode if you want to keep your climb going. But yeah, we'll see how it goes on the ILS. I did have a lot of problems with it chasing glide slope on the ILS and getting way below glide slope. So we'll see how that goes when we get closer to Ketchikan there. Okay, so still tracking along. So let's take a look at some other things on the overhead panel. So that's the autopilot for now. So I'll see you at the overhead panel, and then we'll look at some other features up there. Okay, here we are on the overhead panel, and let's just go through some of the other switches up here, some of the other stuff. So you have some circuit breakers over here. You have your rheostats for your console lights, your pilot lights, co-pilot lights. You have the icing panel. We'll talk about that in a sec. You have other lighting information. Now, I didn't see in the checklist anywhere where you could arm your emergency lights, but we might as well do that. You got bright or dim that's probably for your caution panel. You can turn on reading lights. That's probably for the back. And that's it. So you got some other lighting up there. You got your other lighting up here. You can turn your fasten belts on. You got a flight compartment lighting, which allows them to have lights in the back. You got your bleed air switches. We turn those on. We got that in auto right now. And we got our generators over here, bus tie. If we need to isolate that, we can open up the bus tie. And we got our caution. We can do a caution test up here. And yeah, that's just our rest of our lighting. We got a strobe light on over here and a flight compartment fans. Probably some fans for cool air for the flight compartment. I think it's only heat coming off the bleed air. So I think it's just ram air for the cooling and the flight compartment fans up there. So there would be fans up here giving some air back to these overhead vents. Okay, so that's the rest of the lighting there. Now let's talk about the de-ice panel here. So we have prop de-ice. I imagine that's soft bleed air. We have intake anti-ice. That's probably off bleed air. We have a wing inspection light we can turn on. It's daylight outside, so we're not going to see that. We have a extend intake deflector. So it looks like you have to hold that into the extend position or retract position. And it's probably like an inertial separator that allows air to bypass the intake of the engine. So it probably has an effect on power. I'm not sure if it's modeled or not. And then you have your de-icer boots. So this airplane de-ices, let's go have a look outside. This airplane de-ices with pneumatic boots. So it has these rubber boots on the leading edge of the wing and the leading edge of the empennage here that de-ice the leading edges. And what it does is it inflates these with bleed air from the engines, and when it inflates it, it breaks off any ice that's formed on the leading edge of the wing. And because it uses bleed air from the engines, it runs through a cycle. So I don't think there's enough bleed air to run them all at the same time, so it runs through a cycle. So just by reading the manual, it looks like the normal usage would be to put it in auto and then select slow or fast. And I think then it cycles, I can't remember the actual timings, but I think it cycles through all four: inner wing, outer wing, left stab, right stab. It cycles through all four. In fast, it cycles through it in a minute, and in slow, it's around 3 minutes, I think. I'm not 100% sure. So it just depends on how severe the icing is. So if you want to cycle fast, if you're in more severe icing, just put it on fast, auto fast, and auto slow if you're just in light icing, or light to moderate icing, I guess. And you can also manually select manual, and you're only manually selecting whatever you have selected up here as well, I think. So that's how you do your de-icing panel. So that's pretty much the overhead panel there. I'm not sure how well that's modeled. I was flying in some icing on the previous trip, and there was icing showing up on the wing, and it seemed to stay there for the whole flight. So I'm not sure how much that's modeled. Let's take a look at the windshield de-ice, and that's another panel over to the right here. So here you put your window heat on, so when we had some ice on the wing, window heat, we turn that on here. We also have our wiper here. We can turn those on, fast or slow. And then we can shut it off and then park it. And we have a washer. It doesn't look like it's modeled up there. Go over to the starter. We have our landing lights here, and this is where we had all our start stuff and our battery master switch up here. So that's that panel up there. So that's the overhead panel. And like I said, I modeled a hotkey for the looking up for this panel because it's kind of awkward to look at it. We have an inverter switch up here too for inverter. I don't know if you switch that on, sometimes operate on number 1 on even or odd days and number 2 on even days. I'm not sure how that didn't see anything mentioned of that in the manual, but I might have missed it. Got a reading light up here. You got these little map lights up here, and that is controlled by a switch on the overhead panel, I think. Let me see if I can find that. That might be the flight compartment switches, but I can't tell if the light is on. Yeah, so that flight compartment switches turns that on, but it's daytime, we can't see it. So if you need those map lights on, you're going to have to turn this switch on up here. So I think that covers off all the stuff in the airplane for now. We have our NDB panel down here. We have our transponder up here. We have our pressure for our brakes indicator down here. So brake hydraulic pressure. Now there's no hydraulic switches or anything. I couldn't find anything. I think it just runs off an engine driven pump, and it's probably just running all the time as long as the engines are running, and keeps pressurizing your hydraulic system. So if you're going to have any problems, I think you're just going to notice it here. I'm not sure if there's an annunciator up here for hydraulic pressure. I don't see it anywhere. Nope. No, I don't see anything to do with hydraulics up here. So I think the hydraulics just run in the background to control your, I believe it was just the brakes and the flaps are controlled by hydraulics. Okay, we got a ways to go. This plane, we're not cruising too fast here. We only got a ground speed, well, 160, it's not too bad. We're about, looks like a third of the way right now. So Dozy is down here. So what I'll do is I'll check in with you when we get to Dozy, and we'll load up the approach and go over the ILS approach we're going to fly in Ketchikan. So I'll see you at Dozy in a little while. So we're just coming up to Level Island VOR, and I'm still tracking on the GPS, but I just want to show you that tracking inbound to the VOR, that the VOR1 works fine. So we're in nav mode, tracking on the GPS. I'm going to send up my heading bug, and I'm going to put it back in heading mode, put it back to VOR loc up here, and then if I change my course, you see it works fine. I just go 1 degree at a time and it changes the course and it tracks it okay. But as soon as we go outbound, it's going to go wacky full deflection either left or right again. So anyway, so it does work, and just coming up to level 11 miles to go. I'm going to go back to GPS tracking here and put it back in nav mode, and we'll continue with that. Anyway, just wanted to show you that real quick. So a little further to go to Dozer, and we'll get set up when we're about 25 miles back from Dozy, and just go over the approach we're going to do. See you there in a bit. Okay, we're about 29 miles back from Dozy, and so just some broken cloud layer. So let's go get some weather at Ketchikan here. And I just go to the aux page, insert, and you need a mod for this. I'll put a link to the description. It's a PSM mod for the GPS here. And so the weather is 140 at 14. We're going to be landing on runway 12, and that's good. 10 miles, few clouds, overcast 1700, 7 degrees, 3012. Let's put that in. And yeah, that looks good. So pretty good weather for there. And so let's go over the approach. So we're coming in on the airway here, and we're going to be hitting Dozy, and then from Dozy it's going to be a heading of 124 to intercept the 115 inbound track for the ILS. So the approach is going to be the ILS Yankee and Ketchikan, runway 11, sorry, not 12. 1093 is the frequency, course 115, across the FAF at 4100 feet down to decision altitude of 292, runway elevations 92 feet, it's 200 feet. So 200 and a half, 2400 RVR is the minimum visibility. So what we'll do is we'll hit Dozy, I'll go to heading select, I'll switch it over to the ILS frequency, we'll dial in 115, and then we'll stay on that heading until we pick it up. Then, so what I'm going to do is the minimum altitude for this airway is 7,000 feet. I'll descend to 7,000 feet till Dozy. Then from Dozy I can descend to 4,600 feet. And then from that Ruyok, we can go 4,100 feet and then intercept the glide slope of 4,100 feet from there. So arm the approach. So I'll probably go down to 4,600 feet and then arm the approach. We'll see how the glide slope looks if we're intercepting from below, and then pick it up from there and track it in. So that's the approach. It's VFR, so I'm not going to brief the missed approach, but I have the NDB set up there just in case. Yeah, so it looks pretty good. So I've got the frequency of 1093 set in there, so we're still tracking the GPS. So why don't we load up, just as a backup, the ILS approach in here, just so we have some reference waypoints in there. It's always useful. So if I go, whoop, lost connection. Yeah, okay. My internet's supposedly pretty good. Okay, so we go to procedures, select our approach, ILS Yankee, yep, and we want it by Dozy, enter, and we can, we're going direct dozy now, so I can activate that approach, I think. I'm in nav mode. I'm just going to make sure my heading is ready to switch over in case my services are unreachable. Okay, well, hopefully that fixes itself soon. So I'm just going to actually activate the approach and see what happens here. So going direct dozy, nav stays engaged, everything looks kosher. Okay, that's good. And we're back online. Okay, so check our flight plan now. That has dozy, and there's that Ruyak, and there's the FAF right there. So that's good, runway 11. So everything's in there. So we got some reference waypoints if we need them. They're always handy to have. But we're still going to do the approach using the raw instruments there. So that's the approach we're going to be planning into dozy. I'm going to start my descent now down to 7,000 feet so I don't have a whole bunch of altitude to lose. So I can select 7,000 feet here. And I can hit altitude, go vertical speed, 1,000 feet per minute down, bring back some power. And there we go. And we're going to hopefully capture 7,000 feet before dozy. There's no VNAV or anything in this airplane. You got to kind of figure this out as you go. So we've got 13 miles. I might even descend a little faster than that. We're doing 186 knots, so that's 3 miles a minute. So we're about 4 minutes away. So I'm going to go down at 1,300 feet per minute. I'll bring the power back even more. Okay, so we're on our initial descent. 10,000 feet, I'll get our landing light on. Altimeter is set. Now, the approach, so you need to be below, I think, 103 knots I read to select 10 degrees of flap, and below, I'm going to have to look those up again. See, flap speeds. I keep losing the connection here. So 103 knots to select flaps 10 and 93 knots to select anything above flaps 10. So I want to make sure I get slowed down below 100 knots, select flaps 10, and then below 90 knots roughly to select, and we're going to do the approach speed at 80 knots. So I'm probably going to do a flap 30 landing, and we'll target for 80 knots. Now, that might be why the autopilot's kind of squirrely. As soon as I started getting slow, it got way below glide path. So, ooh, that was a big jump. I think it's because my internet's connecting and disconnecting here. So that may be why the autopilot was kind of squirrely on the GPS, because I had it slowed down to 80 knots. So we'll see how it goes this time. I'll keep the speed up as long as I can, and we'll see how that goes. So how were we close to dozy? 7 miles. It's 1,000 feet to go. So I'm still in GPS mode. I have to remember to switch it over to VOR loc when I get to dozy. And then the initial heading that we're going to fly is heading of 124. Okay, let me get the descent checklists going here. Make sure we didn't miss anything. Okay, Okay, descent checklist, fuel quantity is checked. We still got about 800 pounds, that's good. Well over an hour of flying time. Lights are good. Anti-ice is not required. You just have the pitot heat on. Altimeter is set, 3012. Seatbelt signs, we can put those on. See what I mean? Trying to find the switch here. So it's a lot easier if I just map that to my button there, and then I go up and I look for the seatbelt sign. So fasten belts. Oh, it was already on. So that's good. Yeah, and landing lights are on, so descent check is good. Leveling off at 7,000 feet. Gonna bring the power up. See, we dipped a little below there. Maybe because I was going slow. So we're looking at dozy at 4 miles, and then we're going to continue down to 4,600 feet on a heading of 124. So I'll dial that heading in, 124. And then when you hit dozy, I'll switch it over. This is getting pretty annoying. Must be the server, because I have pretty good internet. Yeah, it kind of sucks having to come over here to get your DME and distance all the time. It's way outside of your cross-check. So 2 miles to go. So coming up on dozy, I'm going to go heading select. Going to switch it out of VOR. Make sure my course is 115. And we're going to wait for our course to appear here. We're still quite far out. And inside dozy, I'm going to descend down to 4,600 feet. Go vertical speed. And I'll go down at about 1,500 feet per minute, bring the power back. Actually, I'll go down about 1,200 feet per minute. Okay, there. We still haven't got our nav come in yet. Hopefully get it soon. Don't want to descend too low. We're still over some high terrain here. Might have to turn on some anti-ice as we come in here. Probably wouldn't be a good idea to turn on the window heat, so I'll go up to the window panel here and I'll turn on the window heat anyway. Still looking for the ILS frequency to come in yet. 1093. Oh, we do have it identified, so we should be picking it up pretty soon. 1,000 feet to go. Look, it takes a big nosedive there. Oh, that's could be a lot of the problems I had was with the winds. I think wind shifts in the sim. Okay, there's our ILS. So I'm going to arm nav, and we should pick up that ILS frequency. Track that inbound. See, we're gone below 4,600 feet. I need to add some power. It's climbing back up. Yeah, I think the autopilot problems might be the shifts in the winds here. From going offline online. Okay, so we're climbing back up now. Speed is good. And so the FAF is 13.9 DME and we are at 19.8, so we still have a ways to go. Yeah. Come on, get back up there. So I'm not sure if this is so much an autopilot problem or a sim problem today of the winds, the sim disconnecting all the time and then reconnecting and getting weird wind information. So here comes our ILS coming in. It's working hard to try to get back at that 4,600 feet. So the ILS localizer is coming in. It's maintaining 4,600 plus or minus, but we are getting kicked around by the winds here. Showing a 50 knot wind right now at this altitude, so that's pretty crazy. And the winds down at Ketchikan were like 4 knots, so it's quite a wind shift. So it's working, getting back on the localizer. I'm going to arm the approach. Should see the glide slope coming in momentarily here. I'm just going to stay at the 4,600 feet. So you see nav captured, because it's captured the localizer, and glide slope is armed up top here. So there we go, glide slope's coming in. And we'll see how this goes. So speed is a bit fast. I'm going to have to start slowing down and wanting to get the glide slope and get my flaps set. So I'm going to bring the power back quite a bit. I'm going to bring my props up to full now. So speed's coming back. Glide slope's coming in. Still working on getting the localizer. But with that 40 knot wind component coming from the right there, wow. Well below 40. See, we haven't captured the glide slope, but it's, yeah, I'm not sure why these altitude variations are all over the place. I think it might be a sim thing, actually. Glide slope is coming in. Should capture it here momentarily. Okay, I'll bring the power back so we can get that first notch of flap out below 100 knots. Yeah, wicked wind. Still haven't captured the glide slope yet. Although we're descending. Yeah, I think as soon as you get slow, this airplane doesn't like it on the autopilot. So I have to power up to go fast again. Because I still haven't captured that glide slope and I'm like 300 feet below. So yeah, I don't think it likes so I've captured the glide slope now. I'm going to keep the speed up to 120 knots and see how it does. It's getting annoying. See how it does flying the glide slope in on this approach so far. So I'll have to delay getting the flaps till we get visual, and then we'll get it slowed down to 80 knots and get the flaps to 30. Seems to do better with the higher speed. As soon as I let it slow down to 100 knots, it seems to go off the rails for the autopilot. I don't know why, because I've used this autopilot in the Cessna at slow speeds, and it seems to work okay. So looking good. Just going to break out of this broken layer of cloud. Speed 120. Yeah, it's doing a better job. Last time it went way below the glide slope, but I was slowed back at 90 knots, and it went right below the glide slope. I had to disconnect the autopilot, and luckily we were visual, and I just had to recapture, level off and recapture the glide slope again, but it seems to be doing a better job if I keep the speed up at 120. The problem with that is you can't get any flaps out. So if you're doing an ILS to minimums, then it's gonna not much time to get slowed down. So what you might be better off is flying the ILS, getting configured, getting slowed down to like 90 knots, getting some flap out, and then hand flying the approach. Something I'll have to try in the future, especially when you get down to mins. Luckily we're not having to deal with that today. How are the winds now? Still 35 knots. Yeah, it's doing a much better job on the approach. I don't see an outside air temperature gauge here anywhere. Anybody knows where there's one, let me know in the comments. Be handy to have. Most airplanes have them, especially if they're IFR certified. It's not up behind me somewhere, is it? Yeah, I'm not sure. Oh, starting to see the lights of the airport there, looking good. Next flight I do in this, I'd like to do some small airstrips. Kind of what this plane was made for, gravel strips. Use the stall capability, get that flat 40 out, come in nice and slow. Weather looks good. Yeah, it's maintaining the ILS pretty good as long as I keep the speed up here. A little bit of rain showers. So at about 1,000 feet, I'll just break it off, disconnect the autopilot, and then we'll hand fly it in and get slowed down. So props are full, landing light is on. Yeah, this plane gives you the warnings for like bank angle, terrain, glide slope, all that stuff when you're coming in. It gets kind of annoying. I think if I'm flying this VFR, I wouldn't mind disabling that. Apparently there's a mod already on flightsim.to that allows you to disable those warnings. Because if you're VFR flying, they're just going to be going off all the time. So you see low power, the pressure pneumatics comes up. So I'm going to start bringing the power back now. And I'll disengage the autopilot. Yaw damper's coming off. And we'll start slowing it down. Getting a little bit below glide slope there. Okay, below 100 knots, I'll get the first notch of flap. And shoot for about, get below 90 knots to get the next notch of flap out. There we go, back on the glide slope. Okay, 1,000 feet, we'll get flaps 20 out. Go for 80 knots now. Get flap 30 out. The only way to visually check your flap settings is overhead. There's no flap indicator. Getting a little slow. Get some power up. A little bit high. So flaps are set, lights are good, speed is good, landing is assured, still a little bit high. I'm going to get a better sight picture. There we go. Still a little bit high. Power up, getting a little slow. And power back. Oh, I think we touched down. Go reverse. And we'll get it out of reverse. There we are. Welcome to Ketchikan. Nice approach into Ketchikan, Alaska here. I don't think there's anywhere we can turn off. It's a big hill to get down to the terminal there. They only have the taxiway at both ends. So I'll get the flaps up and I'll taxi in and then we'll shut her down and we'll go over the flight today. So I'll see you there on the ramp in a couple minutes. Okay, we're taxiing down the ramp here into Ketchikan. Quite a slope coming down this ramp. So if you get going too fast, if you don't want to ride the brakes, you can always just pop a little reverse. Help it slow down, get the speed under control. And there you go. So I'll bring the left engine to cutoff. Anyway, hope you enjoyed the flight today. Well, that's the introduction to the Twin Otter, latest aircraft by Aerosoft. Again, I purchased this with my own money, so just my own personal opinion about the aircraft. Overall, I think it's pretty good. Definitely great looking aircraft. Very challenging to fly. I imagine doing some STOL operations would be very challenging as well in this aircraft. Definitely Autopilot has its issues, so if you're planning on getting this airplane to fly on VATSIM from point to point, IFR all the time, you might want to look at something else. This might not be the airplane for you, but if you like a fully capable, challenging airplane with It's a handful to fly. This can be it. I had a pretty good time flying it. Big improvement from last trip. I think the autopilot seemed to be a little bit better. I will say that some of the issues might be the sim itself disconnecting all the time and reconnecting, and my winds switching around. But you know, that usually just causes an altitude shift. And anyway, for what it's worth, I have had a struggle with this autopilot in the few flights I've done with it, but today was probably the best one I've had. It was a lot of fun. Hope you enjoyed it. Remember, if you enjoyed today's content, hit the like button, sign up for notifications, and we'll see you next time on the Bandit Flight Simmer channel. Thanks for joining me, and take care.